here's what's on my mind today. Topic of discussion: death, grief, Ozzy Osbourne, the Father Archetype, the trickster, spiritual drive, motivation. That's a lot. But they're all connected. And who knows if in this sit down talk, if I'll be able to create that thread that connects them all, because I feel it in here. I feel it in here. I feel it in here. And it wants to be articulated. It wants to be spoken out, made sense of, processed in a new way, besides just remaining in here and in here. So, yeah, a previous topic that I brought up was death, and how a prerequisite to rebirth is death. But in the aftermath of death, there's this thing that happens called grief. And it doesn't always happen right away. That's the tricky thing. But the grief it's like sadness or attachment to an old way or an old life or something that's not there anymore in the way that it was before, persisting in the same way that it was before. So there's this longing that gets created after a death, this longing through memories and the memory of memories and reliving something that was once animated and alive in the way that we think alive is. But in the rebirth, so death happens and then inevitably rebirth happens. Kind of regardless if grieving is like actually happening and taking active place or it's being passive. So we could still be experiencing this grief of this death whilst we are reborn. And it might not look a certain way. Like we've all heard the term, like grieving, everybody grieves differently, everybody processes things differently. So it might not look like moping or crying or being depressed and like, again, it might not happen right away after a death. And one might even think that they're not grieving because it's just not being felt. Like, it's just not being felt. Until something comes along and reminds one of the old life or the old way or the thing that's dead and gone. Like something comes along in our daily life and just like kind of hits. And it's a reminder. Yeah, that thing isn't the same anymore. That thing is actually dead. It doesn't exist the same way it did before. And I feel like when this feeling comes, it's like this feeling that hits in the gut and it's heavy. And maybe too heavy to even acknowledge at the moment. So it just gets brushed off and skipped over until something else comes along again later on, inevitably, to remind of the buried grief and sadness of the old life or the old way or that thing that's being grieved, that's dead. And grief comes from not letting go. Just not letting go. And the not letting go is what's causing suffering. Attaching and holding on to something that's not the same anymore. That's what causes the suffering. But grief can also be used as a catalyst to freedom, because inevitably we're going to experience emotions, all kind of different emotions, and grief being one of them. Inevitably we're going to experience grief. And it can be used as a catalyst to bring on evolution, to bring on a new life, freedom. And so, since grief is inevitable, does one choose to work with it and flow with it, or against the tide, against the inevitable tide of grief? And the thing that's tricky about grief is that our minds are so wonderfully strong that there's a sense that like that it can protect us from feeling grief. So we don't even truly realize that we're having it or that we might be resisting it. So Ozzy Osbourne, weeks before his death, his funeral was today. But a couple weeks ago, he had his final concert and his final gig. And I had already been watching a lot of old Ozzy footage and the Osbournes, because he was in the ethers for a while again, and recently, and then after the concert even more so. And it really struck me seeing him, because as soon as I saw him, he reminded me of my grandfather, my granddad, in the way that it's not that he looked like a twin of my grandfather or anything like that, but it was the resemblance of how he was moving, how he was breathing, how he was talking, how he was like something in his eyes. And yeah, it just struck me so much, and like I instantly felt like I was looking at my granddad. My granddad died a couple years ago, and about a little over 2 years ago. And though I grew up in, so I grew up in a Creole family, and so we were always going to funerals, and it was like, these funerals were like family reunions, and I would be excited to go to them because like I got to see my cousins, I got to play with my cousins, I got to see aunts and uncles, extended family members. So it was like a real gathering, ritual of coming together and laughing together, crying together, burying our people. And though I experienced a lot of that growing up, like my granddad was the first person that was close to me, close, that I experienced death in my life. And I'll be 36 next month, and I think I was like 33 or 34 when he passed away. And before that, I hadn't experienced death in that way, but I always knew it was going to come. My whole life, since I was 4 or 5 years old, I was thinking about, oh my God, the day that my grandparents or my parents die, I can't even imagine it. I couldn't even imagine it. But I've been thinking about it since back then. And I can't elaborate how much when I saw Ozzy talking and his energy trying to like come forth, summon his energy into those performances or like into like conversations he was having with his family, it reminded me so much of my grandfather when he was at the end of his life and in the final year of his life. It's like this heaving for breath before talking, like having to muster up all the energy in his body to speak. And even little things like the way he would move from side to side in the chair right before he would muster up the energy to speak, in the shoulders, like little things. And when I saw that, I was like, wow, like Ozzy's dying. Ozzy's old. Ozzy's an old man now. Ozzy's not he's not how he used to be. He's waning, and I recognized that because I had seen it in my granddad. And so then, yeah, it was almost like it was a shock when he died. And the day that he died, actually, I haven't even addressed like that my hair is red right now and that I'm wearing a spike necklace, but the day that he died, it was announced in the afternoon. And earlier that day, I got full regalia out. I went and bought a spike necklace that I had been pushing away buying since I was like 12 years old. And fully claimed this feeling that like I love red hair. And so I went and got me this awesome wig that I have on right now, and got gothed out and punked out that day, and felt good and felt like fully like the work that I've been doing on myself and with myself, this soul work, this journey I've been on. It was like that aspect of me that I have had pushed away and repressed since middle school. She was online, literally like online, because I had posted a picture of myself regaliaed out, basically just like this, except I had a Pink Floyd shirt on, and basically announced myself to the world, this part of myself that has been hidden for a very long time, and that I've been coming into communication with, and over years now, and coming into feeling like safe to like reclaim her and hear her, listen to her myself, and acknowledge her, and actually like now let her be express herself. So that day that I like posted that, and then I see that afternoon that Ozzy died, and the presence of Ozzy was in my childhood, in those preteen years, 12, 13, 11, 12, 13, was like, he was there. You know, the presence of Ozzy was there in those formative years of my life where I was like experiencing this, you know, I guess this darker side visually, this God side, this punk side, you know, this like heavy metal side. And in those years too, like the Osbournes was on television, and like we got to see a side of Ozzy where he's like this crazy fucking guy, but also like he was being a dad. He was being a dad and doing dad stuff on that show. And so like rewatching that show again has been, I mean, before he even died, it was like a rejoicing and a grieving for that aspect of myself that was alive at that time when that show was on, when I was listening to Ozzy. Like, I had a best friend in those years, and her dad loved Black Sabbath and loved Ozzy. And he would like blare, we would get in the vehicle and he would max the radio out with Black Sabbath or an Ozzy Osbourne song. Her mom and dad would blare it on the weekends when I would go, and we like couldn't disturb them. They were like, you know, like partying to Black Sabbath or whatever, but like it was in the background, you know, and it had a synonymous thing with like the father archetype in a weird way. Like I'm seeing that now. The father archetype being the spirit of, in my opinion, the spirit of freedom, like freedom of spirit, of like, don't give a what anyone says. You do you, and do what you must to be you, you know. And I mean, as you can see, I'm like still formulating even like how I feel about this, but it's a big old ball of yarn. It's a big old barn of y'all. It's a big old ball of yarn. As emotions are. And emotions are something that we can tease apart, you know, unravel like a ball of yarn. And so, yeah, this aspect of Ozzy being like, oh, the father, the wild man, the trickster, that brings about maybe fear, because I did have an aspect of like kind of fearing Ozzy Osbourne, you know, the persona of Ozzy Osbourne when I was a kid, because I was into rock and metal and all that, but like there was something about Ozzy that was like, woo, that's a little beyond my pay grade at 12 years old. That's how I felt back then. And I look back at, you know, the lyrics and the music now, and I'm just like, he was talking about they were singing about real emotions, real things that are like battles of the soul and the spirit. And I don't know how these things can drag us down, I guess. And then we deal with them in whatever way we deal with them. Like this part of myself that I'm showing right now, she popped out for a couple of years. You can see my little wig thing there. She popped out for a couple of years. And then in retrospect, you know, like I thought that I had to like put her away. And so this other part of myself came online when I got to high school, and much more toned down, which was another aspect of myself though. And it was more of that like cowgirl aesthetic, country girl aesthetic. And that felt safer for me to do at the time. But let's see where I'm going with this. What Ozzy's death, seeing all this footage and like just seeing him in this elder state that he had been in, was that thing that came along and reminded me of knock, knock, knock. You've got something in there, Caitlin, that you have not fully processed. and fully grieved about your granddad, about your granddad's death. And even more so, the inevitable death of my father. That will happen one day, just like will happen to all of us. All of our parents is going to happen to us too. And it's going to happen to our children. We will die. And they'll experience that grief. So, in this big ball of yarn that was already happening with me having this inner self that I've kept hidden come online, it just so happened to be at that same time where these same themes and music were visiting me in my middle school years is happening and was happening at that time and is happening right now. And so this death, this grief, this death of my grandfather, my granddad, after he passed, I didn't experience what is typically looked at as like grief, like crying and morose. And, there was a lot of reflecting and a lot of growing. But seeing Ozzy in that state weeks before he died was like a punch in my gut, because he just reminded me so much of my granddad when he was at the end of his life. And it was telling me, knock, 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 there's something there. And then he died last week. And I guess I've just been brought back to this, even more so to this phase of my life where my childhood, what I guess like was my childhood, was dying. And I was going into adolescence. And with adolescence came the rock music, the darker aesthetic. And then on the other side of that, when adolescence was ending and I was going into high school, so teenage years, this death of that darker aesthetic happened. And then came this other part of myself that I had continued to carry a long time. But I'm finally seeing that, of like a clearer view of the cycles, how the cycles come and they go. And they're all part of me. Like these cycles are all part of us, and accepting them. And different phases of our life bring about different like challenging things that may be hard to process or be with, feel or experience at the time. But it all comes back around. It always comes back around. Unprocessed emotions always come back around. They just want to be expressed instead of buried and not dealt with. I think that our fathers and our grandfathers, our fathers, because our grandfathers are our fathers too, are meant to teach us how to feel safe to be ourselves fully, to be free. I think that our fathers are meant to teach us to be warriors for ourselves, warriors for our freedom, the freedom of our soul, the freedom of expression. And mothers have the things that they teach, and fathers have the things that they teach. And the archetypes of the two have things to teach us. And it's okay to say that fathers and the father archetype has one wheelhouse, and mothers and the mother archetype has one wheel, and has its own wheelhouse too. But today I'm talking about the Father. Freedom. And so when Father dies, or parent dies, and they're the ones that we learned how to be a certain way from, and they've been almost like doing it for us, or doing it right alongside us. And then when that's not there anymore, who's there to show us how to do that thing? But it's inside of all of us to actually, we already know how to do it. They and the archetypes are just the example of how to do it. So I feel like Ozzy represents that. For all the crazy, yeah, he had a fucking crazy life and did some crazy shit. And yeah, I don't have to say more about that. We all know about it. Like, he did some wild shit and said some wild shit. And I think that can teach us how to be freer. Like, we all have that within us. Like, I have that within me. No, my father taught me how to be independent. And much more. But it's up to me to understand how to do that for myself. So you know what? I really don't know how to like tie this up. Grief, the final frontier. The final frontier. Posthumously. After death. Rebirth. But also grief. Where does the grief get to have its place? Because it's not always right after the death. The rebirth can be taking place, and the grief can be trying to come through. And it may not have a place yet, but it will. And it does. It comes. And it might be disguised at first. Hit you out of nowhere. Going about your life, and that death that happened, I wasn't fully grieved. Well, something comes along and reminds you of that feeling, of that grief, of that sadness. And it hits you. Just in your everyday life. Something you see on TV, something you hear someone say. Another death of some kind comes along and just hits you. And you remember that feeling. That feeling. I like to describe it as this really heavy feeling in the gut. That's what it feels like. It feels like a suitcase. Holding on to the suitcase. Something comes along and reminds you. Knock, knock, knock. I'm that unprocessed grief. Didn't go away. Still here. Just waiting on when you're ready. Just waiting on when you're ready. And then if we're not ready at the time, then feel that punch in the gut, and then just kind of like skate over it. Suppress it again until something else comes along again. Reminds, hey, I'm still here. Hey, I'm still here. When you're ready, I'll still be here. Everything comes back around. Nothing just goes away. When we can't deal with something, in order for us to get along and stay safe and carry on with our life, we suppress things. And that's a certain way of doing things that helps until a certain point when it doesn't anymore. Because suppressing means that you're continuing to hold on to it. If the topics that I spoke about in this video today resonated with you and touched you, I would like to invite you to head on over to my YouTube profile. In the description, you can click the link to download your free Discover Your Purpose Self-Coaching Starter Kit. It's a great way to begin uncovering what your true calling, what your true purpose, what your true mission on earth is.